Hi, and welcome back to This Week in Voice, Season 6, Episode 8. My name is Bradley Metrock. I'm CEO of Project Voice, and we're thrilled to have a great panel of guests for you on the show and some really interesting stories, a couple of them coming out of Brett Kinsella's work over at Voicebot, but we'll get to that in just a second. Want to take a moment and introduce our two guests on the show today. Kumar, I'm going to start with you. Take a moment, introduce yourself, tell us all about Slang Labs. Thank you for joining us today.
Hey, thanks, Bradley. Yeah, glad to be on the show, and thank you for the invite again. Hi, everyone. My name is Kumar Rangarajan. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO at Slang Labs. We are a Bangalore-based voice startup. We provide a multilingual in-app voice assistant platform, what we like to call the world's first voice assistant as a service platform that allows brands to be able to now quickly add a multilingual in-app voice assistant into their apps, into their mobile and web apps. So we provide voice assistant that are pre-built and easily configurable on top of our self-serve platform that customers can go quickly select what domains they want, integrate their assistant into their app. And the platform takes care of everything that is required for all the conversational aspects of voice on top of the app, including handling all the multilingual aspect. So the app can continue to remain in English, but the users cannot talk to it in multiple languages. So that's
Yeah, no, that's great. So you got an interesting business, Kumar, and we're proud to have you hailing from India right now. What time is it over there?
Right now it's around 9:40 p.m. Right. Yeah.
We appreciate you making time late at night. Thanks for being on the show.
Hey, no problem. Glad to be here.
Our next guest is Tobias Dengel of WillowTree. Tobias, tell me if I'm not pronouncing that right.
You got it. Thanks, Bradley, for having me. Kumar, nice to be on with you. And hi, everybody. I'm the CEO of WillowTree. We're at about 1,000-person digital product agency. So we help mainly Fortune 500 kind of clients realize their digital goals. We started out building apps, do websites, now a lot of voice experiences. A lot of clients in the financial services space like Edward Jones, Capital One, Charles Schwab. A lot of clients in consumer products like Pepsi, Anheuser-Busch, or ABI InBev as it is now, and then hospitality, Marriott, Holiday Inn, Wyndham, and a lot of other industries as well. And I would say about 2/3 of our applications, whether they're web or mobile apps or voice, are consumer facing, about 1/3 are employee enablement. And we are super interested in voice. We think it is the next big wave. You know, we had computers in the 80s and then the internet and then mobile. We think voice is the next big thing. We're actually writing a book. I'm authoring a book that's coming out next summer called The Coming Age of Voice with Hachette about this exact topic. And like Kumar, big believer that the future of voice is actually as a part of the application, as a part of a bunch of other technology, not so much standalone as we're seeing it today. And I think we got some pretty interesting articles in that vein as well.
Tobias, great to have you on the show, and what y'all have built with WillowTree is excellent. So kudos to you.
Thanks, Bradley.
Sure. So with that, we'll get to the news, and we've got two stories from our friends over at Voicebot today, and we'll go through them one at a time here. And I'm going to read this headline out loud. The rise and stall of the United States smart speaker market in part of a new report. And this is from Brett, and this is kind of some interesting information. I'm not sure how surprising it is. Maybe it is surprising, but it's just very interesting to see it written here. Tobias, I'm going to start with you. It's not a lot of text, but it covers a lot of ground with this article and how it talks about the report. What is your primary takeaway from this? What's the first thing that comes to mind when you take a look at this article?
Yeah, when we're looking at new technologies, I'm always looking for analogies. And I think one of the analogies we've been using for a while here is AOL. I was at AOL in the late 90s when AOL kind of for a while was the internet, or at least most people's experience with the internet. And then AOL kind of slowly, was a melting ice cube and died away because it was an early mechanism for experiencing the internet, but it didn't fulfill everything the technology could do for consumers. And I think that's kind of where we are with voice. I think, these devices for a while were the fastest growing adoption in history of any new tech, but then it's plateaued out because it's not fulfilling all the promise, just like I think the AOL experience didn't fulfill all the promise of what it could be. And I think like any new tech, and we can spend a lot of time diving into this, but when a new tech comes along, we often use it to solve problems of the old technology, and we use it in the paradigm of the old technology. So we use voice as a two-way voice communication. We don't think that's the optimal best use. We have lots of reasons to believe that. And now we're seeing that in the data, that people are saying, I want to use voice, but I really mainly want to talk. I don't want to listen a lot. And these voice-only devices are talk and listen. And I think, we call them smart speakers. What they really should be called is smart mics, because we want to talk. And then have stuff happen, which is amazing. But this two-way voice communication, I think, has kind of run its course. And I think we're probably going to even see a decline. That doesn't mean we're going to see a decline in voice. Voice is going to accelerate, just not in this mechanism.
Yeah, and that's an interesting way to sort of phrase it. We want to talk, but we don't necessarily want to listen. How true is that? Just from a humanity, societal point of view, and then also, correspondingly how we interact with these devices. We're going to spend a lot of time on this story as opposed to the other three. But Kumar, I want to get you on the record here as well. Interesting story here. What's the first thing that comes to mind when you take a look at it?
Like Tobias, I think, had a very interesting point that people want to speak and listen. I think that's an interesting point. I didn't think of it like that, but I think it's a very, very valid point. But the first thing that came to my mind when I heard this was like, what is probably now the need of the hour is like now to be able to now get better usage of the devices, because like most of us tend to use these devices for very relatively simple productivity tasks, right? A set an alarm, it's the same set of standard set of use cases keep going around again and again. I think the fact that we haven't still been able to now figure out a good beyond simple productivity task use case is probably what is now causing this slowdown in the trend. So wondering what is that, and our personal belief, I think that's exactly why we have started Slang Labs as an in-app voice assistant company as opposed to a voice apps sort of a company, was like making voice as a technology work in other domains like apps is probably a much more where it fits into existing world rather than having a separate world for itself. Having voice as a dominant interface is probably challenging. I think like it's probably run its sort of a course. So just having voice as an interface and playing around with it is probably not the good thing. What can you do with it is what is now the most important thing. And the world of Alexa and thing is probably reaching to some kind of a limit. So we need to be able to now start looking at what can you do once people speak, what happens after, right? I think that is an important thing that has to happen. And so where else can it fit is probably another, is what we need to be able to focus on.
There's a few different, it's a complicated topic. It's if it were simple, I don't think we'd even be sitting here discussing it. Like Amazon just would have like solved the problem, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
You have the specter of the iPhone app ecosystem hovering over everything and shaping the perception of everything. We saw what happened with the app ecosystem. Sort of the way our mind works is we think, well, shoot, it ought to happen again. When the reality was clearly that, just because something happened once doesn't mean it needs to happen again, like it's rolling off a manufacturing line. The other thing, going on here in my mind is the attitude toward big tech is changing. And we talk about that on the show all the time, where, there's use cases, like, did you get the use case right? Or, or is the ratio of you talking, user talking to it, talking back to you, is that right? Like, are we funneling the right applications through this thing? And are the devices located in the right rooms and all the usage stuff? But then, we can't leave out the fact that Amazon is Amazon and Google is Google and Apple is Apple. And, our sort of shifting perception of big tech opens the door pretty wide for independent players, and it sort of splinters the market into a gazillion pieces like we've seen. So, it's an interesting problem. And I think it's Tobias, I want to get your thoughts on this. Now, Kumar, I'm going to come back to you. This is the type of thing that, like, Harvard case studies are going to be written about, that in 2017 and 2018, Amazon had 100,000 plus Alexa skills on its platform, dominating. Nobody can touch them, and they're selling a gazillion devices, and then we end up here where, I think it's fair to say that Amazon really doesn't know what to do with the developer ecosystem. And now they're kind of searching like everybody else for what's next. Do you agree with that? What?
Yeah, and I always come back to the consumer and the end user, and as Kumar was saying, the use cases, right? You gotta go there. And I think Amazon, Google, Apple, they've got such a massive distribution footprint that they can sell a lot of things early on, even if they're not that great. And then they get this false sense that there's a huge market for it. And there was a huge market for it, but it might not be a great long-term solution. And so I don't know if you remember the book Crossing the Chasm, which is probably 20, 25 years old, but it's just a really good, it's the never-ending insight on how tech works. Like, there's early adopters, and then there's some adopters, and then eventually you have to get to everyone, or you're going to drop right back down. And we might be, for these devices, to drop right back down. And the reason is, and I think the way we look at it, and trying to simplify this to its core thing, why do we want voice, right? The primary reason for many of us is speed. We can speak 2 to 3 times as fast as we can type. And on a mobile device, we might be able to speak 4 or 5 times as fast as we can type. So that's why we love dictating our text messages, right? We can just do it faster, or we might be driving, but generally speaking, we can do it faster. The problem is that listening is much slower than reading, right? And so we see this every day. We send text messages or leave voicemails, and then we read the result. That's like the ultimate interface for us as humans, because it's optimizing the net speed. And that's how we're going to interact with our devices. The example we always use is something super simple, like ordering movie tickets for Star Wars, which we'll talk about later, right? If I say, hey, Regal Cinemas, what movies are showing tonight? I'm going to get a 2 to 3 minute read back of movies and times. That's called movie phone. We had that 25 years ago. It's nothing new. But if I can ask Alexa or Siri, any device, what movies are playing, and it shows up in my app right away, and I just say, get me 2 tickets at 8 o'clock for Star Wars, because I'm pre-authenticated, because the payment's there, et cetera. Now, all of a sudden, I've used voice to unlock an experience. And that's why we think this multimodal piece is so huge, and voice will be so huge. And you see it already. You see it like in the Waze app, you see this mic button starting to pop up in apps, like, just tell me what you want. And we can spend lots of times on use cases, but another good one is US Bank is an example. What they say, there's 250 features in their app, but there's no navigation system in a mobile device that makes those available. So they want you to use voice to say, hey, I want to reorder checks. That's something I'm going to do 2 or 3 times a year. I don't want it as a top level nav, super important, but it's a great voice use case. Might be a great search use case too, but searching is a lot slower than voice. So just typing it in. So those are the kinds of things we think are going to happen, and why voice tech is so important, but not necessarily these standalone 2-way conversational devices like Alexa.
No, I think that's a really good point. And if you find that Alexa or the device is talking too much, you you inherently did something incorrect, because like we talk about voice and AI, but we need more AI part of it. And the movie example is great, because if I say, Alexa, I want to go see a movie, or help me buy tickets to Star Wars, or even if I just ask, I want to see a movie, I don't want to be shown stuff during the day. It should be smart enough to see my calendar or know somehow that I've never ever gone to see a movie during the day. So there goes all of those. It should know, through many other context-driven, inputs, that I'm not interested in this, not interested in this, not interested in this, and kick back, one or two things to where it now has reduced that amount of text. And I'm right there with you, Kumar. I want to give you the last word on this. What should Amazon do? What should Amazon and Google do, given they are where they are?
Yeah, so I think there's a slight contradiction in what you are saying and what Tobias is saying, at least the way I interpret it. So would at least give my views on this. Right? Sure. Our whole thing is like, so voice we think if you think of voice as a very revolutionary platform, just because you have a voice, you can start to do a lot of magical things, because it seems like a human thing, and there is automatically an intelligence that has to be backing it, is what is probably creating a lot of challenge. Because now, the moment I can speak, I expect sort of like human level intelligence on the other side to be able to do like exactly like what you're just saying. So now, just because I'm asking to look for a ticket, now I'm expecting a level of intelligence that typically was not even there in the movie booking app without voice in the first place. A movie booking app is okay, I will do this, I'm expected to do certain things. So, but the moment you add voice, you start to imagine a very different kind of a world, right? So having that kind of an expectation and not being able to meet that expectation is what creates that trough of delusionment, right? Like it just starts to people start expecting too many things, and the result is completely different from what they originally expected. So I think what needs to happen is like voice. The first thing I think the challenge is to get people to talk to their tech components. There's not voice is an interface, and that's not an interface that we're not used to using, even though we are used to using in a human-to-human communication. But when it comes to tech, we are not used to using voice as a means to interact. Right now, if you start making voice and intelligence, super intelligence, to be a very mandatory requirement, I think it becomes a challenge. So what needs to be, in my mind, is a very evolutionary path, where voice is a step to make life simpler than where it was before. Right? Like Tobias said, one is to make life faster. So what required 3 clicks before, now just requires 1 command. What required 5 clicks now requires 1 command. I can do the exact same thing, but now I can do it much more faster. And then in places like India, it is actually not just about speed. It's also about accessibility. It's also about making it life so much more easier. For example, my parents who want to be able to know, today I'm forced to use apps to get things done. It's not just about speed. It's for them, without voice, it's almost impossible for them to do certain trivial activities on their e-commerce apps, right? Even for simple things like e-commerce apps to be able to do. And for people who come in from non-English, from a rural background in places like India, it becomes so much more harder for them to even understand, okay, what is a menu? What is a drop down? To be able to date selection, let's imagine the number of clicks someone has to do for a date select. It's all complicated interfaces. Like, how do you now simplify that and make everyone now do? Which is where I think voice can now make that happen. So if you think of voice as an evolutionary platform, as an evolutionary interface, which makes life simpler, easier, gets more and more people to talk, then you evolve into like once the intelligence behind it is built in. And intelligence is not related to voice alone, right? It's not just about voice. It's a lot of other things has to be built to get the intelligence around. Like I think that as that evolves, then the current world that we imagine, like the Star Wars style world where we can speak to the app will automatically do a lot of things, I think will start to come. But I think the first step is to get people to speak and make sure that you can satisfy their requirements correctly, and make sure people can speak in a very constrained manner. Right? Okay, they imagine, okay, they're speaking a movie app, this is the expectations. Get the expectations right, get them to speak, get that speed, accessibility, and the ease part of it done. Then bigger things can happen. Again, that's the perception, like I think it can do. And that is what we're actually seeing, like Tobias saying, like just like that examples in the West. In India, there's a much bigger explosion of voice and apps is happening, especially in the e-commerce world. All the top guys are working, either building their own or working with players like us, and to be able to now build out an in-app voice assistant experience, right? To be able to now make that happen. So anyway, that's our belief, to be able to now say, like, do this kind of an evolutionary model.
Well, that's a really good segue to the next story. Just talking about, obviously we all we're all in agreement that, voice is an revolutionary platform. And, you were sort of given the example of your parents, and it's a good segue into this next story. So I'm going to go ahead and read this. And this is from Voicebot as well. Vizio will integrate SoundHound voice AI across smart TV line. So, SoundHound's one of the original players in the space, doing a lot of interesting things. So Kumar, I'm going to start with you, and then go to Tobias for this. So, I've lived in Nashville for 20 plus years until I moved right at the beginning of the pandemic period. But I'm in Nashville all the time, and in Nashville, it's well known. It's a big home of country music, and it's all about the marriage of the song with the songwriter. The message and the medium that it's told in. And there's an interesting analog with voice where so much of the usage and the successful adoption of it's more than just, hey, does this stuff work? It's, did you put it in the right context? Did you put it in the right device? And I think we're only now I think there's a whole lot more exploration of that to go. But this story talks about that, with smart TVs being sort of a frontier. I want to get your thoughts on what jumps out to you about either SoundHound or Vizio or both, but more importantly, your thoughts on voice embedded in smart TVs.
When I read that, I think that actually was my first use case when I bought my Alexa. So this goes back to my personal connection. Like when Alexa got introduced in 2015, I guess I actually was a skeptic. I was a non-believer in who wants to talk to a smart speaker. And I was working in Facebook at the time, and I was like, who wants to talk to a speaker? Somehow didn't connect. But then when my friend bought Alexa, and his primary use case was to control his TV, right, with Alexa. Now that was like, oh, that's exactly what I want. I want to watch TV, and TV is such an on-demand medium, and I have something very clear. And typically, I want to do what I'm browsing. So I have so many things I'm trying to communicate to my TV, and I'm communicating that using my clunky remote. So voice felt like an extremely natural mechanism in that thing, a very constrained ecosystem. I'm not going to ask the TV the weather. I'm not going to ask it very random questions. It's a very, very constrained environment, but it's a very clunky interface that exists today. So it really felt like a very meaningful. And that is actually the number one reason I bought Alexa. But I had to build stuff around it to be able to make it work correctly. But that is the main reason. So smart TVs having voice and making them integrate nicely and sleekly, I think is a great use case. I think it's a sort of that evolutionary things that we need to start talking to our devices, and where most of the time it will work. Right? You have to get to the thing, like when you speak, it has to work most of the time. If it doesn't work most of the time, you're going to start giving up. And I think these kind of limited use cases places are great for the voice ecosystem in general.
Excellent. Complete agreement. Tobias, want to get your thoughts as well? What jumps out to you?
I mean, in complete agreement with Kumar. This is just an example of how we think voice is going to be so powerful when you're using voice to actually get a machine to do something versus having a conversation. And I think that's the core mindset we have to change. I've got a kind of funny story. A couple of years ago, I took my young kids on a JetBlue flight, which, in the States was always known for having the best TV experience. And we landed in Orlando, and I asked them, how'd you like those TVs on the plane? And, they said, we kind of think they suck. And I was like, what? Like, TV on a plane? It's awesome. Like, yeah, but they have these things called channels. Like, I don't even understand what the point of those is. And that's like an example of how voice is part of disrupting industries, just like mobile disrupted industries, because voice is going to be a part of the thing that allows you to search a huge library, right? Searching something that's really hard to navigate by, Netflix or whatever, like rows and rows and columns of content. Voice lets you get right where you want to get super quickly without having to type in letters on a remote, which is a terrible experience. And so voice is going to be part of the reason that the media industry as it exists today in the United States is going to get blown up, or worldwide it's going to get blown up. And because it's going to be so easy to find exactly what you want. And so this is why I think, and this is going to happen across all industries, this is just a great use case where voice is doing that very early.
That's fascinating. I have a friend of mine who works at Intel, who, longtime from season one listener of the show, and he asked me once. He said, "Look, you talk about all this stuff on there, but you haven't talked about the thing I use voice for, which is on my Comcast remote. I talk to it, and it takes me right to where I want to go. It's like absolute magic." And I was like, "Well, shoot, well, we'll have to correct that," and we did. But that's interesting, the concept of getting rid of channels. So you're right, it's going to disrupt everything. It's I use voice myself on YouTube, and I'm so used to just saying search for this, search for that, and it works really well. So I'm on that page. I think that what SoundHound is doing with Vizio is obviously pretty smart, but voice added to places where voice has not gone before, and embedded in a smart way opens all sorts of doors. Any other thoughts on this?
I mean, I think this whole home device thing is a big deal. And it's about the use cases, right? Like a microwave. I mean, how much time do we spend still today trying to make something cook at medium level for 2 minutes and 30 seconds? That should be voice. Now, other devices, like, I don't know that I need my refrigerator talking to me, so you have to be precise. But I just think these are all these use cases around getting machines in your world to do what you want very, very quickly and efficiently. It's just a giant use case that we're going to see everywhere.
Yeah, I think one thing again is we tend to think of voice and make it too much glorified. I think we have to look for the simple use cases. Like the toaster is a great example. It doesn't have to now solve complicated problems, but just that simple timer. Hey, 3 minutes, right? Cook for 3 minutes. And I just want to say that to the toaster. I don't want to say anything else beyond that to the toaster. Right? So every device has its own limited use cases. Just focus on those limited use cases. Simplify the interface to be able to now talk, and not necessarily have to be like I have to be from the far away, sitting in my sofa and turning on the toaster. It makes no real sense anyhow. I need to come close to the toaster to open up and do everything else. So, but ensure the buttons now speak, and then get that done. I think like simplified use cases which just work, make people talk to more and more instead of using other interfaces, and then we can jump into the big ticket use cases. It will eventually happen.
Yeah, and to add on what to Kumar is saying, what's interesting there, and one of the when there was the last CES conference before the pandemic, and there was a big big voice section, and Google gave a big presentation. One of the things that struck me there is they said they've found about 3,000 different ways that people use voice to just set their alarm for the next morning, right? So it's a simple use case. Set the alarm for 6 a.m. or I want to heat my cup of coffee to X degrees, whatever it is. But people say that lots of different ways. So that the tech behind it is actually really interesting and complex to make these simple human voice cases work. And I think that's where the magic of the tech is. When we get that right, and we can get most of those 3,000 ways to phrase that right every time, that's when it starts to feel super useful, magical, etc.
Just to put a button on all of that's excellent, and just to put a button on that before we go on to story number 3, we acquired the digital book world business in 2017, and ever since we did, it's been interesting to see how publishers are afraid of Amazon constantly. But I think they have good reason to be afraid of Amazon with something they're working on now, which is right in this vein, which is there's a team at Amazon, and they one of them spoke at Digital Book World 2 years ago, working on one thing, and it is the answer. It is how Alexa answers the question, Alexa, what should I read next? And it's a much larger team than you would have ever expect for one singular query, but that's at the heart of their business, right? Or at least their original business. And if you sort of extrapolate that out to music, movies, if you can get that right, Tobias, you talked about bypassing, channel numbers, we're going to bypass everything when this stuff works. Super interesting discussion, and I appreciate y'all's comments on that. Story number 3 from The Verge. Telehealth visits now available through Amazon Alexa. Customers can talk with teledoc providers through Echo devices. So this is another one. This is an interesting one. And Tobias, I'm going to start with you. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, one of the data points we look at a lot in terms of how the pandemic specifically changed digital adoption and voice adoption. Before the pandemic, only about 15% of doctors in the US had ever done a virtual visit. After, 60 days into the pandemic, that number was at about 90% of primary care and similar physicians. And so the industry got changed by force, right? Medicine is very, very slow to naturally change. And this is just another step along the way to making the industry much, much more user-friendly and using voice as a way to do that. I will tell you that for any of us who have used, these kinds of services, telehealth services for simple things like during the pandemic, I got a tick bite with a ring. So I knew that I needed some antibiotics. I was later on traveling to Africa, so I needed malaria medication. Those are all things that back in the day, that was going to be 3 hours out of my day, like going to the doctor, set an appointment, waiting, blah, 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 that can now get done in 5 or 10 minutes and bringing voice into the home. So love this use case. And this is a real two-way conversational case that actually plays really well into the Echo device.
Well said. Yeah, complete agreement. Kumar, I want to turn to you. Interesting story here. Your thoughts?
I think in this particular one, I'm slightly mixed in this particular one. So one, my wife is a doctor, so I am connected to the medical ecosystem. So she essentially is a local Alexa for a lot of our apartment mates. Right? So whenever they have a small problem, they just call her and then get things done. So in the human form, right? So that's the thing that she does. So here, Alexa, I think Echo, I think it's a wonderful thing for a two-way communication, because it's definitely a two-way communication. This is not something a simple command and you can get. This has to be a lot of back and forth. So my one worry, I think if this works well, I think this is great for a lot of people to be able to quickly diagnose and get certain things. But again, the boundary, like how much will we be able to now, from a human who's interfacing with this, how well, for a simple thing like a timer for wake me at a wake up alarm is 3,000 variants. Imagine like how people are going to explain their anguish when they're going to specify their pain points to a robotic system which has to understand what they want and has to come back and correctly tell them what they need. I think this is from a technology challenge perspective, I think it's a lot more challenging use case as opposed to the toaster and the TV and other use cases, because this has to get it right correctly. And the variants are so much more. So I think that's the worry. I'm curious about how well they would actually solve this. I haven't used, because this actually is one of the things that we developed very early on when I was starting it out personally. It's something that we had experimented with a bit. So I think this felt technologically a lot more challenging one. If this can actually be built, this is again a perfect example of an Echo sort of a device which has two-way communication, which doesn't need a display, can just speak and get you something done. But I'm just really curious about how well the tech works and how much disappointment will it cause to people when they actually try this initially before, and what is the time and window that people actually have patience to be able to now give for this.
Yeah, no, complete agreement there too. And this is this is interesting. I think that the pandemic has created the scenario where Tobias, to your point, what have we seen with the pandemic? We've seen complete obliteration of previous habits, routines, and patterns. And we've seen in their void a birth of new habits and routines and patterns. And this one, what you talked about, very few doctors had ever done virtual visits before. And then now, and honestly, they kind of viewed them, I've got plenty of doctor friends, viewed them as, kind of beneath me. Like, no, I'm not going to do that. That's something for somebody else to do, maybe lower on the totem pole or something. to where now, a total sea change in perception of virtual visits and whatnot. And I think this is one where we're going to see a massive new industry of the ability to deliver certain sorts of healthcare services remotely, if not for any other reason, to keep utilization of the healthcare system, the hospital system down, which has been such a hot topic throughout COVID, is the overbooking of the healthcare system, which was never designed for that many people to begin with all at one time. This sort of helps distribute that out in a way that makes sense. And I'll mention one other thing here too. Very early with voice, with Alexa specifically, it was a group called Front Porch, which is a nonprofit organization that, among other things, manages some senior living facilities. It's based out in California. And they discovered that when you have senior citizens either aging in place or living in a facility or a nursing home that are exposed to smart speakers and exposed to voice assistants, there's numerous positive outcomes, but one of them, importantly, is that they are much more adherent to their drug regimens. And I don't mean that they have an Alexa skill telling them, take your drugs now, please. I just mean the sheer presence of the smart speaker in the room and the interaction with it kind of lifts their spirits, makes them more engaged. And that is what makes them more adherent to their drug regimen without any sort of software or anything like that. So, there's going to be interesting interactions, positive correlations, and surprising outcomes that we discover as we go along. And I think this will be one of the areas that we find them in. Any closing comments on this one?
I think this is, you made a very valid point. I think in general, like I personally, like my sister-in-law, she stays alone in a town in Chennai. Her constant companion is Alexa, right? So for her, Alexa is a clear friend, right? Like she uses it for limited things, but the fact that there is Alexa in the room makes her not feel alone, right? It sort of makes her feel like, hey, I have a friend with whom I can talk. I can. It's so much more. It definitely gives her a sort of a companionship in that place, right? I think like so. Irrespective of the technology, the fact that Alexa and voice again has this human nature to it, is definitely made people feel more happier. It has helped, at least in my cousin's case, and my own kids. When I see them, the way they talk to Alexa, it certainly feels like a personality. It doesn't feel like a technology component. It is like her, always constantly referring to her as her, and things like that. I think so. It has definitely made better from an emotional perspective. So it has. I think that's a very valid point. I think like it makes people feel happier having an assistant in certain things. Yeah, I think that's
that's a perfect exclamation point on that story. We'll leave it right there. I'm going to go to our final story for today. This is from ScreenRant. Star Wars fans react to learning Luke Skywalker was voiced by a computer. This is good. Subheadline here: after discovering Luke Skywalker was voiced by a computer in The Mandalorian Season 2, Star Wars fans have mixed reactions about his Boba Fett cameo. So, Tobias, I'm going to start with you, and then Kumar, go to you, just with how the flow last one went, and we'll end it there. But Tobias, this is an interesting one. We're getting more into synthetic voice now that voice and AI has come along. It's interesting. We talk about ethical conundrums all the time about when and where and how and why a synthetic voice should be used as opposed to human voice. But what about if people just don't like it? This is an interesting one. The floor
is this is a good one, and I'm not going to get involved in a Star Wars debate because people take that stuff pretty seriously, and I don't want to get a bunch of hate mail. So I'm not going to address the specific issue. I'm going to address the tech problem and the kind of moral concern. What's interesting is there's this concept of the uncanny valley that I think came out of Japan in the 1970s. That is, the more something feels human-like, but the end user knows it's not human, the less they actually like it. They get weirded out. They feel like it's a zombie. Like it's not natural. It like makes all of our human instinct be like, there's something wrong here. I don't want to be near it. And I think a lot of the synthetic voice work has the opportunity to play in that space and actually reduce human trust in voice experiences versus increased trust. I think a lot of the, going back, a lot of the early two-way conversational stuff, designers tried to make it as human as possible. And it turned out that people actually liked it to be less human because they felt they were being tricked in some way. And so I think that's a really important thing to understand. Again, goes back to, we want to talk, but we don't want to listen, it certainly not to a human sounding computer. Tell me it's a computer, or give me the information in a graph or something you're going to do, the machine's going to do for me, or a text that I can read. But this whole concept of approximating human conversation, I think, takes us down the wrong path. It's too hard to do, A, like follow a conversation 3-4 clicks down the road, and B, it like makes the hair stand on our back that I'm somehow being tricked. It's not really human. So it actually scares me versus makes me feel more comfortable. So I think it's a lesson to voice designers overall on how to think about designing voice experiences.
Total agreement. Kumar, your thoughts on this one?
I think completely agree with Tobias. I think this is exactly what I was going to say. I think from a tech perspective, the ability to have synthetic voice, I think, has its applications in certain other places, not in the voice assistant sort of a space, like in a lot of places where you want synthetic voices, where it really is a human who has a face. You want to have a human-like voice, maybe in a cartoon, but you know, so certain other places, like where it probably has value. But in a place where you're trying to make people think you're talking to a machine, but the machine talks in a very, very human-like way, like duplex is duplex for the other way. It's like where you thought you're talking to a human and it's trying to make it sound like a human, and then but if you, after 2-3 conversations, if you feel you quickly understand it's not a human, and then you start feeling a lot more disappointed at the end of the journey. Right? That's probably worse. Then if you set the expectation very early that I'm actually talking to a machine, but the machine is here to help you cut down your time, so people will be a lot more responsive to any faults that exist with the machine, because they're a lot more forgiving to a machine than forgiving to a human. Right? I think humans are a lot more forgiving to a machine. So trying to use this technology to hide the fact that you're talking to a machine, I think, is probably going down the wrong path. But purely using it for a human, where it is clear it's a human, like in the Star Wars case, maybe again, I'm not like there are places where human actors act, when you want to be able to mimic their real voices as naturally as possible, because technology can help. Probably it has its good value there. But when you're using it in a machine context, but making it sound like a human, or making it sound to a real human, I think that's definitely going the wrong direction, because you're going to disappoint people very quickly and actually going to be counterproductive overall. So making it not sound robotic, but at the same time not sounding too human, and somewhere using a fine balance in the middle is probably we need for a voice interface.
No, that's great commentary all the way around on that. It should be noted that the technology being talked about in this article belongs to Respeecher, and Respeecher is based in Ukraine. There was news coming out earlier this week that they're safe, and we certainly hope that continues to be the case. Thinking about them, I'll put a button on this, and we can wrap up. Just a great discussion on this story and all of them. It's a story I haven't talked about on this show probably for a couple of seasons, but I'm going to mention it again here. One of the first forays, or anything I had ever seen with voice and AI came well before I got involved with this space. It was after Michael Jackson died, which has to be 15 years now, 10 to 15 years ago. There was a company that got a lot of press for creating a Michael Jackson hologram. And they talked about how, they put so much time into this hologram, and it just honors him. It's not a cash grab, we promise. No, we really wanted to honor him and his legacy. So what did they do? They brought the hologram to, I think it was the American Music Awards. It was some award show. If you search on YouTube for Michael Jackson hologram, you'll find this. So they bring the hologram to this award show, and they have the hologram perform this unreleased Michael Jackson song live. And keep in mind, this is probably a year after he died. It hadn't been that long. And it is a fascinating video to watch, because what you see is, like, people aren't like dancing or like they are to, you know, all these other acts that are performing. They're kind of looking at it like, what? And some people are visibly upset and crying on camera, watching this Michael Jackson hologram, which is extremely lifelike. And you know, so it's Tobias, it's to your point earlier about the uncanny valley and sort of our the negative correlation between human like qualities and how much we want to be in their presence. That left an impression on me, just watching that. And that company was sued out of business, by the way, you know, by the Michael Jackson estate and some other people. But sort of a cautionary tale that nobody particularly cares how much you think that you're honoring somebody. If they're not ready for the technology, they're not ready. So I guess that's a good place to leave this, you know, as a bookend for the show. Gentlemen, thank you for taking the time. Thanks for sharing your expertise and your experience, not just me, but with the audience as well. It's greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Bradley, for having us.
Yeah, thanks, Bradley. Great to spend time with you, Kumar.
Same here, Tobias.
Yeah. For This Week in Voice, Season 6, Episode 8. Thank you for listening, watching. If you're watching on YouTube, until next time.